So we'll begin this day with the idea of grace, asking God to allow us to feel that grace in us and all around us. The word grace begins with the letter G, so let us begin with gratitude this day. Just find yourself settling into wherever you are seated. Relax shoulders. Let your hands relax on your thighs, or if you want to lay down for this next few minutes, do so. Just find yourself coming home to your breath, coming home to your body, the gift that God has given each one of us, the tabernacle of our souls. Gratitude. Bringing up in your mind's eye all that fills you with gratitude. The people, the places, the things that fill your heart, your mind, and your body with gratitude this day. Next up in the word grace is the letter R for reflecting on love. From the moment you woke up this morning and placed your foot on the floor next to your bed until you find yourself sitting here, breathing in God's desire for peace. What is the love that fills your heart, your mind, your body this day? Gratitude, reflecting on love. Next up in the word grace is the letter A for affirmation. Repeating to yourself, I am a beloved child of God, and in me, God is well pleased. Again, I am a beloved child of God, and in me, God is well pleased. Gratitude, reflecting on love, affirmation. Next up in the word grace is the letter C. Where do you feel centered and calm and competent in your heart, your mind, and your body this day? And feeling relaxed and still, calm and peaceful. If there's any area where you might feel a little off-centered or imbalanced, imagine God whispering in your ear, offering you some compassionate, loving advice. What would you hear to come back to center, back to calm? Last but not least in the word grace is the letter E for enthusiasm and excitement, naming that which fills your heart, your mind, and your body with enthusiasm, asking God to bless that which fills you with joy, and that this be used for the greater good of the world the greater good of your communities and families, and the greater good and glory for God at Madrum Dei Gloriam. So we begin this day, this session, asking for God's grace to fill us, surround us. And we ask this as we ask all things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Carol. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining. This is our fourth session of our 5-session, the first Ignatian Yoga in Everyday Life online retreat. So the retreat came about really quickly after we transitioned into this time of shelter at home. We were supposed to have a retreat on March 20th to 22nd that many of you are going to be at, including Nikki, Frank, and Carol. And well, that obviously had to be canceled. And so it's great to be able to regather online and for Frank to join us and Carol to join us in teaching today. So Carol has been part of our team for a while. Ignatian Yoga kind of started at Fordham University, where Carol is campus minister at. So when I was in about 6-7 years ago, right soon after becoming a yoga teacher, started a class at Fordham and in one of the chapels there, and that's continued to blossom, and Carol keeps that going and does a lot of retreats there. So really nice to have Carol with us. We'll be teaching the yoga class in the second part of this. And then to share a little bit about Frank, so it's been a real honor to get to know Frank over the past number of years. I've been really excited to be able to sit with him and pick his brain. So a little background of Frank, there's some we shared in the email, and some of you maybe saw the videos that him and I sat down and recorded a couple years back at Notre Dame when he was at a visiting chair position there last year. So Frank was from New York City, was born and raised there, and went to the Jesuit high school, one of the Jesuit high schools there. Entered the Jesuits right after high school, and so he's been a Jesuit now for 52 years and a priest for 42 years, I believe, or coming up on that at least this summer, I think. During his regency time of formation, so which is usually about years 5, 6, 7 of Jesuit formation, he went over to Kathmandu, Nepal, and taught there, and started to form relationships with the people there who were Hindu and Buddhist, and found common ground and began to dialogue with these people, and so this sparked his interest of learning from the other and deepening his own faith tradition. So he went on to do a doctorate at University of Chicago in South Asian languages and civilizations, and then went on to teach for 21 years at Boston College, and now has been at Harvard for the past number of years as the professor of divinity and professor of comparative theology. So comparative theology is a field that Frank really began. He's the pioneer of this field. And so comparative theology, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about to some extent, but just differentiating from comparative religions or other fields. So comparative theology is seeking to understand my own faith in dialogue with other traditions. So it's a back and forth dynamic, learning from the other, how they challenge, how they shed light on our own faith. So I'm sure Frank could say that a lot more about that. He's written many books that way more than I could share right now. But a couple of the books that he has written that are all available online, you could find Theology After Vedanta, Beyond Compare, St. Francis de Sales, and Sri Vedanta Deshika on loving surrender to God. And his recent book that's recently been published is Reading the Hindu and Christian Classics, Why and How It Matters. A few years back, well, in 2013, Frank was writing on the America Magazine blog on yoga and Lent. So great that you can find Googling that. So really nice to see kind of how some short blog articles that he wrote each week. So yeah, and most of all, it's just been a really real inspiration personally and for Ignatian Yoga to be able to sit with Frank to learn from him. So it's a real honor to have him with us. His lived experience and his academic perspective really open up a whole nother dimension and depth for Ignatian Yoga. So thank you so much, Frank, for being with us. I'm really excited about the work he's already put into showing this point of connection and helping us go deeper in this. So I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy Frank's talk. It'll be recorded, so you can go back to it. And there will be time for question answer that Carol and I will be sharing some questions. So as we go through, if you want to put a question into the chat box, then that way we can draw on some questions. And then once we're done with this part, we will then move into the yoga practice in the second part of this. So, all right, Frank, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, thank you. So I was sorry to miss going to Mariandale for the face-to-face encounter, but nonetheless, I'm very glad that Bobby and Nikki and Carol and Alan have put this together online. It's making the best of the moment in a very good way, and so many wonderful connections that can be made in this way as well. I do see a few familiar faces on the screen, so I'd say hello to a few people I know from previously, but also many new faces. So I won't take any more time to talk about my own background, but I'd be happy to talk about that when questions arise and so on. And I would just commend, as a general point, this whole project of Ignatian Yoga. I think it's a wonderful venture, and that it's both something that has been kind of developing for a long time, and also something that is very timely in our 21st century. I know one of the first books I know of about yoga and Christianity was back in 1926. A.C. Uppaswamy, an Indian, a convert to Christianity, wrote a book called The Use of Yoga in Prayer. I think you can find a PDF of it online, but I can also make it available. So from then on, and surely before that in people's practice, trying to connect the Christian and the yoga traditions to one another, I think has been an important venture. Jean-Marie Deschenets, a Dominican priest in the 1940s and 50s, developed what came to be called Christian yoga, books both in French first and then in English translation. All through the decades since then, this has been an ongoing venture. Father Tom Ryan, many of you know his work, Christian Yoga is so important. For instance, his 95 book, Prayer of Heart and Body, Meditation and Yoga as Christian Spiritual Practice. He's one of the leading teachers of this in our time. And to see Ignatian Yoga was kind of finally Jesuit spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, becomes more explicitly a part of this long tradition. So I think it's really important that this be taking place. And as Bobby said, I mean, I have some experience. I've been going to India on and off and Nepal for 50 years almost at this point. I've been a Jesuit for 52, as Bobby said. I'm not a yoga master in the sense of being able to teach yoga. I practice a little bit of yoga every morning as part of my morning meditation, but I have no particular skills or wherewithal to be a yoga teacher. And my path is much more what you might call jnana yoga, the path of knowledge and the path of learning, both in terms of my own Jesuit tradition. The exercise is so basic to Jesuit spirituality, the foundation of it, and also through studying the Yoga Sutras, teaching them. I've taught a course in the Yoga Sutras, which I hope to teach again in the fall, if teaching goes forward as planned. So I have like lots of different knowledge on different levels, but I'm going to try to keep my presentation to about 30-35 minutes in order to maximize the chance for some questions and comments from you, because I think your practice and your experience maybe will help clarify what I'm trying to talk about as I go forward. And what I thought, what can I offer that hasn't already been said by others in books I just mentioned, and the kind of work, the handbook that Bobby sent me of Ignatian Yoga has so many wonderful things in it that I'm not the person to repeat things that have been said before. So I'm thinking about it, and again, thinking about going to Mariandale for the retreat there, trying to come up with, well, where can we talk about like the deep meeting point between the Yoga Sutras as one most influential expression of yoga and the spiritual exercises. Now, both of these, as I'm presenting them, they're texts. The book of the exercises, the book of the Yoga Sutras, but we have to assume, as we know on both sides, that they came out of experience, came out of practice, and are never kind of normative in terms of everything about yoga or everything about Ignatian spirituality is in the books. But nonetheless, the books are an important place to go to think about how these things are connected to one another. And that's basically what I'll do. I believe most of you have access to the 3-page handout that I made available through Bobby, and put a thesis before you to try to make sense of how I'm thinking about this. And the simple question was, as I put in the title there, where the spiritual exercises and Yoga Sutras most deeply meet. And I'm trying to argue, as I say, given the many points of resonance and difference between the traditions of Christianity and yoga and the spiritual exercises and Yoga Sutras, can we find a deep central point of contact wherein the two traditions of practice, you might say spirituality and theology, most creatively come together? And thinking about this, again, thinking as a Jesuit and thinking of what I know of yoga tradition, I kind of ruminated over this over the winter months, and then came to this proposal, and it is, and you can push back and say, what about this, what about that? Maybe there's a better way to think about this, but that we consider the election, that core moment in the exercises, a choice of a way of life viewed in freedom before God in the exercises, and the moment of focus, the free, quieted mind and heart turned eventually back to the world in the Yoga Sutras. And that the two of these together, that free space in the exercises of a choice for a way of life, and what I'm translating as focus in my own translation of the Yoga Sutras, the end of the Ashtanga path. So you have dharana, this kind of meditative process, deeper meditation, dhyana, and then samadhi as the culmination. Immediately then Patanjali says the three of these together are samyama. And samyama is this kind of like bringing them together and focusing, which I found to be a good word. But that, as I'll come to in a moment, there's a way in which there's kind of an intense possibility created through the entirety of Kriya Yoga, through the yoga practice, but then that leading to this moment of being able to say, you reach this point of focused attention to the world, and that liberates your relationship to the world. Now let me expand on this and say a little bit more about it. Again, still under A, for discerning God's will and deciding it, Ignatius thinks that the person on retreat needs complete freedom to make a right and best choice. The moment of focus in the yoga that culminates the 8-limbed Ashtanga Yoga, a moment of utter tranquility and freedom, requires long discipline, such as leaves aside all encumbering and distinguishing factors, while leaving one open to choices among all the points of focus that follow. And I'll come to in a bit about the rest of the third pada of the Yoga Sutras. What is that about, where samyama is applied 20, 30 times over? On the exercises, I assume that everybody knows something about the exercises, but I'll just say a few basic points. And there are so many beautiful things in the exercises, and I think Kevin O'Brien and Frank Buckley have already talked in various ways about the exercises. It's in your handbook. Bobby and others have talked about this at length. So we know a lot about the exercises, but in terms of thinking about what this is for, Ignatius never seemed to have intended it in the beginning as simply a spiritual moment for its own sake, but is rather to take your life, which he assumed for all of us, he would say original sin is kind of disordered, things are out of whack, and then to be able to put it back together in a space of self-correction, honest admission of what you look like in the presence of God, the presence of the crucified Jesus, and then by the contemplative turn to who Jesus is, to be able to see again who you are, and therefore to open the possibilities of what you can be. And so, as everybody knows, there are 4 so-called weeks to the exercises. As everybody says, these weeks are not necessarily weeks of 7 days. The second week is often longer. The first week shorter. The fourth week is shorter too. But nonetheless, kind of 4 moments of the exercises where confrontation with oneself, as they say in B, coming to terms with one's failings, sins, also with life, aging, illness, and death. There are contemplations of heaven and hell, final judgment, but also a contemplation of God looking at the world and trying to see how the world looks from God's viewpoint. And for some people, Ignatius would say that's all you should do now. Do that first week of the exercise, come back when you want more. But certainly that was very profound for himself and then for his first disciples. The second week, these long, loving contemplations of Jesus in the Gospels, from the incarnation, the nativity scene, the visitation of Mary to Elizabeth, the Sermon on the Mount, the miracle stories, the multiplication of loaves and fishes. And Ignatius seemed to have utter confidence that looking at Jesus in the Gospels was transformative. Seeing him, he's like a mirror. You look at him and you see yourself in that mirror. And to do this over again each day, and each day you begin with a general theme like the multiplication of loaves and fishes. The second time you narrow it to the parts that touched you most. The third time, the fourth time, you keep narrowing it to points of focus. And then in the evening, you just throw yourself into the scene and say, I'm here sitting there when Jesus is doing this. What did the bread taste like? What did the fish taste like? What was the murmuring in the crowd and so on like that? You become part of it. And doing this again and again and again as transformative. And the third week, not surprisingly, is the week of the Passion. How Christ died for us. And this is often, as when I first made the long retreat, as we called it, the full 30 days back in 1969, it was geared to Holy Week. The third week was Holy Week. And we kind of went through the Passion and death. And I think, again, this profound kind of sense of contemplating Jesus in his last days, both his courage, his piety, his willing to die for those he loved, was incredibly important for Ignatius in saying this speaks for itself. It shows you how things are. And then the fourth week, often seen as Easter week, as we are experiencing now, opening it back up and coming out of that moment of the cross and death into the resurrection scenes, and then the contemplation of God in the world and seeing everything in light of God. Now, all of this is quite beautiful, and all of this, is very powerful. But what I, say in the middle there, if you have the colored version of it, the election, how shall I live in light of what Christ has done for me? And Ignatius has, as I have there, still under B. The first time is when God so moves and attracts the will that without doubting or being able to doubt, devout soul follows what is shown it. St. Paul being knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus. St. Matthew, Jesus says, get up, leave your table. He leaves all the money he's been collecting and all that behind and just follows Jesus. These immediate moments, no need for great explanation. The second, consolation, desolation, kind of sifting through one's life, how God is beginning to speak to you, what God is calling you for, what God is pushing you away from. This was the experience of the exercises for Ignatius in the original form. And then the third one, a time of quiet, when one considers what we are born for, to praise God our Lord and save our soul. Desiring this chooses a state of life within the limits of the church. That was his imagination. Finding ways of serving God and saving our souls, a time of quiet when the soul is not acted on by various spirits and uses its powers naturally and freely and tranquilly. And this seems to be, I'm claiming, and I could support it with some footnotes, that this is really what the exercises are most about, is getting to the point where you are in this moment of freedom to make a choice about your life. And therefore, the first 2 weeks are the lead up to the election. And they help you through looking at yourself and looking at Christ to become the kind of person who's free to do what God wants. And then the confirmation of the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus and the return to the world is not simply you make your decision and then immediately you run out, but rather after making your election, you have several weeks more to kind of confirm it, deepen it, purify it, and then go forth into the world. I have this unusual quote to finish off B. Roland Barthes was a French literary critic, philosopher, I believe not a Christian at all. I don't know if he had any Christian background. He may have been Jewish, I'm not sure. But he has this really weird little book, Sade, Fourier, and Loyola, Fourier was some kind of a French reformer, I recall. Sade was Marquis de Sade, inventor of sadism, you might say, in a certain way, and Loyola. And he just found Loyola fascinating, not because he was a Catholic or a Jesuit, but Loyola important. And he says this: the exercises are, the 4 weeks are articulated in 2 moments, a before and an after. The pivot of this duality, which is not at all a middle space, but a center, is at the end of the 2nd week, the free act by which the exercitant chooses in conformity with divine will, this or that conduct about which he has previously been uncertain. What Ignatius calls to elect. Election is not a dialectical moment. It's abrupt contact with a freedom and a will. Before, the conditions of a good election, after, the consequences. In the middle, freedom, that is substantially nothing, no thing. And where the will of the person making the retreat and the presence of God come together. And that's very profound, and I think he's right in getting to the core of it in that fashion. And the question, of course, is, well, how do you do that? How do you get into that nothingness for a moment, not outside the sphere of the exercises, but in the middle, where there's nothing between you and God? God is like the mirror in which you see yourself. God sees God's self in you. And that's very profound. And obviously, and this is obvious in this context, moving on to C, that my proposal is that how can we prepare to be in that space in the complicated world in which we live? All right, you make the exercises. That's one way, and maybe the basic way. But also that in this project of Ignatian yoga, there is this powerful possibility of drawing on a very ancient tradition, far older than the exercises, in which there is this effort to try to transform one's life in order to reach this utter still point called samadhi, or in the broader form, this ashtanga, which concludes with dharana, this kind of meditating process, dhyana, the focus, still meditation, and samadhi, this like utter openness, which many people have talked about as a kind of no thingness, a kind of open space. Now, to understand this, and we could go on for hours on this, and we definitely won't, because I promised Bobby that I would not go on too long, is that to understand the structure of the Yoga Sutras. And I know many of you know this well, and you've taught the Yoga Sutras, and so I won't go on too long. But in my analysis, the first book and the last book, the first pada, last pada of the exercises, are explanatory of the frame of what is most important, namely what happens in the second pada and the third pada. So although we can read them, and people do read them, and commentators for thousands of years have read them just sequentially, the first pada, the samadhi pada, is really, as they say under C, a theoretical turn, an overview of the intellectual problem and the resources for the solution offered by yoga. So starting with that definition of the chitta vritti nirodha, constraining and calming the activities of the mind. And starting with all these kind of bothering things that distract and make the mind unstable. And then talking about these practices, the abhyasa, the vairagya, ishvara pranidhana, by which one practices and practices and practices, learning how to calm the mind and do away with these disturbances. And then vairagya, learning to be detached. That's such an Ignatian term too. No longer having a raga for the world, but learning to live in the world without being obsessed with it. And then ishvara pranidhana, turning to the Lord, as if turning around, like in the biblical terms, the metanoia, you turn and face. You turn and face the Lord. And this is all kind of spelled out in very kind of logical order by Patanjali in the first pada. And then the higher states of the sampragyata samadhi, the asampragyata samadhi, and we can't go into the details now unless you want to go into them later. But these kind of states, where does this lead? And where does this kind of calming of the mind and liberating of the mind go? What are the virtues connected with letting go and letting the mind come to equilibrium? And by the time you get to the end of the first pada, you've had kind of a panorama, an overview of the exercise of yoga, and where yoga begins and where yoga kind of comes to culmination. The fourth pada, which I'll say almost nothing about, the Kaivalya pada, is this like advanced treatise for advanced philosophers and yoga practitioners about this state of isolation. It's sometimes translated kaivalya. In my translation of the sutras, I translated it as utter simplicity, like nothing but being simple. And I think even scholars, and I can give you references if you want, talk about the fourth pada is like, again, it's not quite an add-on, but it's beyond the basic work of the Yoga Sutras, giving you a sense of what actually is this ultimate state like, and putting it in these fairly radical terms. In the middle, you have the second pada, which is the Kriya pada, this Kriya yoga, the practice, the yoga of practice. And I think here is obviously the heart of what the Yoga Sutras are about. Because I had often puzzled, as I'm sure many of you have, the most important part of yoga for most people is the Ashtanga, the path, the eightfold path, or the 8 angas, the 8 limbs of yoga. And ironically, they're kind of stuck at the end of the second pada and the beginning of the third. And why are they stuck there? It's almost like it potentially said, well, everybody knows that's what yoga is, so let me stick it in there and hide it and see if you can find it. But I think what he's doing, if you say the first book and the last book are bookends, in a good sense, in the middle, you have the second pada, third pada, which pivot around the Ashtanga, which ends the second pada and begins the third pada. And the second pada is really this lead up, because he's an intellectual explaining things about what Kriya is, what Kriya Yoga is, leading up to the Ashtanga. So again, we don't have time for this, but the yoga of action, the tapas, swadhyaya, and again, Ishvara pranidhana, the tapas, the ascetical practices, the swadhyaya, some kind of study or reflection, and again, turning to the Lord, which attenuate the afflictions, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, all these different kinds of attachments at various levels, and removing them. And it's all very detailed, and definitions are given and so on. And to end these afflictions, these kleshas and these disturbances, in a sense, this repeats some of what's said in the first pada, which is comprehensive, but it's much more kind of effective, and the afflictions and the need to overcome all the disturbances is now being practically put forth. And this idea that our attachment to the world is the cause of our suffering, and therefore the soul and the body, the self and the world leads to suffering. It sounds Buddhist, it sounds like Advaita Vedanta, it sounds like any kind of asceticism, but there's a way of kind of needing to cut through and break the link. And by the time you've gone through the first part of the second pada, then finally you do this by the practice of yoga, the angas of yoga, and then starting in 28, 29, 30 in the second pada, you have the practice of yoga. So yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. And I think understanding it is that therefore the whole setup has been leading to saying, okay, you know about Ashtanga probably before Patanjali wrote or composed this text. This was already known. But the context is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the solution that follows? And the lower forms, and many of you I'm sure are expert on this, on ahimsa, non-stealing, truth-telling, brahmacharya, and so on like that. All of these things fall in place. Pranayama, asana, which we'll do a bit of later, all leading up to this kind of detachment. And then I think probably for dramatic effect, over in the third book, although I don't know when the books became the third book, the books, the vibhutis, the powers or the expressions, where dharana, this kind of holding in place, focusing of a certain sort, dhyana is meditating, and then samadhi is this kind of concentration, bringing everything back into place, is the pivot around everything, which everything turns. And so the second pada leads to that. And then beginning of the third, you have dharana, dhyana, samadhi. And then he says in an extra sutra there that the three of these together are samyama. And again, for want of a better term, I translate it as focus. And the reason I do that is because the rest of the third pada is really about applications of samyama. So if you have my handout there, you can go on to in C, scroll down a bit. I give samples of the sutras that follow in 3, which are often neglected, and there are often warnings given by yoga teachers about not wanting exotic powers and so on like that. And that's appropriate. You don't do these things simply to get power. But what's important is that the word samyama comes up like 10, 15 times after the beginning of the third pada. And then it's implied another 8 or 10 times. And the person who's in this state of samadhi seems for Patanjali not to simply be utterly silent, like totally gone, but rather able to focus their mind on different parts of reality and bring out the true meaning of reality by turning to these different parts of reality. And so if you have the lists, I have 16, 17, and so on like that, by focusing on the 3 evolvings, past, present, and future, knowledge of what is past or yet to come. So meditating on, in a certain way, on time itself. Or 17, because of the imposition on one another of words, things, and ideas. Ideas, things, words get all confused with one another. Samyama shows you the difference among the 3. You take your yogic mind, your focused mind, and it opens up this space. Therefore, you hear the cries of all beings. Like you can hear reality speaking to you. And so on down the page. Focus on friendliness, focus on powers, focus on the sun, the moon, the navel chakra, the hollow in the throat, the nerve path, the tortoise nerve path, the light in the head, and so on like that. You can see the list there, and for the sake of time, I won't go through it. Ending with, at the bottom, 52, 54, 55, a kind of a state of ability to kind of focus on the world around you and see it all at your, there for you. Again, not that you can do magic tricks or something like that, but rather that you're able then to see reality kind of illuminated, open, transparent in a free fashion. So because of the focus on movements and their succession, knowledge born of discrimination, this viveka, this ability to see things exactly for what they are and not. Making one cross over from this world to the next, perhaps, having everything as its content and such content in every way without succession, that is the knowledge born of discrimination. And this ability, again, to see the world as it is. And again, many people say the advanced yogi, is outside the world and steps apart from the world entirely. One argument is that this person may not be running around doing things, but has this like total awareness of the reality in which they live and sees it all, discriminates it all, understands it all. And then finally, when there is the sameness of purification of both being and person, utter simplicity. The world is pure, you are pure, and you have kaivalya, nothing butness, this ability to simply be in the world. So I think you see the point of that, and I'm going really fast, but I think there's a way in which the yoga path, the Kriya Yoga, the Ashtanga leads you to this ability to see the world exactly as it is and to be free in relationship to it and to be able to focus on whatever you want in the world and let it be for you as it truly is. So having done that, and then I'll whip along here, and I'm doing well on time, I think, D on my handout sheet again. So Ignatian Yoga is yoga and it's Ignatian. So as I say there, because it is yoga, it aids us in clearing an inner space of complete freedom, wherein we can see ourselves in light of God's grace and nothing else. Yoga helps you to do the exercises better, you, me, everybody. It gives us the freedom to stand there with nothing in the way in the presence of God. The Yoga Sutras point to a simplicity of focus that fosters freedom on all sides. Focus provides a context of utter freedom for the election, enabling us to stand quietly in the space where our own freedom encounters God's own freedom. And as you know, in some of the Hindu traditions, like the Shiva tradition and so on, the great yogi, God is the great yogi. And you always have the presence of the meditating person and God who is free in the culmination of yoga, able to be in the face of one another with utter attentiveness. The other side of it, Ignatian Yoga, because it's Ignatian, understands too that utter freedom in God's presence is freedom for, a freedom to return to the world, a freedom to make choices, a freedom to be back among people. The exercises teaches the Christian yogi that in focusing, the focusing that holds our attention quietly and at length on one reality or another, there are choices that can be made. And again, one view of yoga is that you reach samadhi and you don't make any more choices. But the rest of the third pada is all about what do you now look at? What do you focus on? And I think that perfectly kind of carries back over into the Ignatian frame. The Yoga Sutras 3 gives us many examples, though in the end settling on the greatest of all acts of focus, a total non-confusion of self and world and utter simplicity. But for the Christian, in that nothing but moment of simplicity, can there not be a choice to follow Christ? The last part, I just give several examples and then I'll be done. So if you go back in E, I give here my translation of the first 3 sutras, the first 4 sutras actually in 3, binding the mind to a place, dharana or holding, extending there a single thread of idea, meditating, dhyana, simply that, shining forth as just the object, as if empty of any proper form, samadhi, or concentrating. And the 3 of them together, focus, samyama. And I think what could you do with this, the Ignatian yogi? And I suggest here, leading up to the election, Ignatius has the 3 degrees of humility. And those of you who have made the exercise know this is always a part of the exercise. And it's sort of like, here's a manner of humility where I will not sin in God's presence. As it says, I so lower and humble myself as much as possible that in everything I obey the law of God, that even if they made me Lord of all created things in this world, nor for my own temporal life, I would not be in deliberation about breaking a commandment, whether divine or human, which binds me unto sin. So don't sin anymore, Ignatius is saying. Don't commit mortal sins. But then better than that, more perfect humility, if I find myself at such a stage that I do not want and have no inclination, riches rather than poverty, want honor, I don't want honor rather than dishonor, a long rather than a short life, the service of God our Lord, the salvation of my soul being equal, and so not for all of creation, nor because they would take away my life, would I in deliberation even commit a venial sin. And this is an old-fashioned Catholic distinction, mortal sin, venial sin. But I think he means mortal sin of the grave errors, the crimes that people can commit. But venial sin is like settling for less. You could do more. You're making preferences for your own will rather than God's will. And the ability to look and say whether I'm rich or poor, whether I'm honored or dishonored, whether I'm in or out, whether I have a short life or a long life, all of that is in God's hands. And this is kind of a yogic detachment. If you know the Bhagavad Gita, the samatva, having a sameness of attitude to all reality. You're able to look at it without fear or any kind of distraction. And then the 3rd degree of humility, it includes the 1st and the 2nd. And if the praise and glory of God is equal, to order to imitate and actually be more like Christ our Lord, I want and choose poverty with Christ poor rather than riches, opprobrium with Christ replete with it rather than honors, and to desire to be rated as worthless and a fool for Christ, who first was held as such rather than wise or prudent in this world. And this is why the 3rd week follows after the election, to see Christ poor, abandoned, made a fool of, having nothing, and saying, can you really go there with him all the way? Can you pick up your cross and follow? And I think there's a way in which my thesis again is that the brilliant value of yoga practice and attaining the end of the Ashtanga path is that it makes you the kind of person who can do focus, samyama, on the 1st degree, the 2nd degree, the 3rd degree of humility, opening them up and being honest about where you stand in relation to the 3. And that while people can do this without knowledge of yoga, to be sure, I think those who do have knowledge and experience in the practice of yoga approach the 3 degrees of humility with a more intense kind of freedom and honesty, and the ability, as one would focus on the stars or the moon or the sounds of creatures, to contemplate what it means to be humble this way or this way or this way. And then finally in F, where all of this might end, the beautiful contemplation to gain divine love at the end of the 4th week of the exercise. I know you've talked about this before, The fourth point, the last of the 4 points in the fourth week, is to see how all the good things and gifts descend from above as my poor power from the supreme and infinite power from above. The very powers that make us alive, our vitality, the shaktis of our being, all of this comes from above. And so justice, goodness, pity, mercy, and so on, as from the sun descend the rays, as from the fountain, the waters from the fountain. And to see ourselves in this like transformed view of reality where everything is flowing down from God. And I think the person who has been able to practice yoga and stick with it for a very long time is able to not simply have this, oh, that's a good idea, but rather to be able to see reality in this kind of free, opened up form where it is what it is. And then with this, I ought to reflect on myself, considering with much reason and justice what I ought on my side to offer and give to His Divine Majesty. That is to say, everything that is mine, reaching this kind of selflessness, this parigraha, holding on to nothing, as in the yoga practice. Myself, mine, everything with it, as one who makes an offering. And then you have the famous prayer of the exercises, which are used in many contexts. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my intellect, and all my will, all that I have and possess. Thou gave it to me, to thee, Lord, I return it. All is thine, dispose of it according to thy will. Give me your love and your grace. This is enough for me. And being the kind of person, after 50 plus years as a Jesuit, I can say those words. I can sing them in various settings and so on. But where's the power to make that real? And I think the path of Ignatian Yoga is a very, very powerful way to do that. And I think I'd say that the end of the fourth week is where the third pada ends up. And I'll just repeat these. The crossing over, now with everything as its content and such content in every way, seeing everything as interconnected and without passing successions. It's all in the present moment, not past, present, future. It's all at one. That is the knowledge born of discrimination. That's the true insight discernment. When there is sameness of purification in both being and person, then you have utter simplicity, kaivalya. And the kaivalya of the end of the third pada, I would say, is the kaivalya of the take and receive prayer. And that these two kind of come together as harmony, like they were meant for one another. And that is what we try to do in Ignatian Yoga. Well, thank you for listening. I think that's what I wanted to say. And I'd love to take questions for as long as we have. I think I did pretty well on time. Over to you, Bobby.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Frank. That's such an amazing gift that you're sharing with us of drawing these really rich, deep connections. How far can we go in another tradition, and how do we make sure we're being most respectful of both the Christian faith and tradition that most of us come from and then engaging with another tradition?
Well, I would say, on the first level is that, again, caution and prudence are really important. And that we know that Ignatian spirituality can be a way of life. We know that yoga spirituality can be a way of life, and that they are often practiced by people who do one or the other. And that's quite possible. And there are people who convert. I mean, they go from one to the other, and that happens. And so we have to be aware of that. But I would say, just as Ignatius Loyola is concerned in the exercises about, don't think you can imitate Christ and die with Christ and be a great saint for Christ unless you've done the first week, where you have to just look at yourself clearly and without romance in the eyes of God's will. Part of the point of the way the Yoga Sutras are set up, and this is another way of saying what I was saying, the third pada, often you have all these seeming powers. And often people, I think it potentially saying, well, don't just do this because you want to be able to fly through the air or read other people's minds or live forever. You have to be a right kind of person first. And therefore, the theoretical setup of the first pada, and then all the stuff about tapas, ascetical practice, swadhyaya, turning to the Lord, and then all the steps toward the yamas and niyamas and so on, all these disciplinary practices, before you become the kind of person who can proceed in this way. I think there are safeguards in the yoga tradition as well as in the Ignatian tradition to prevent people from kind of casually or imprudently just sort of wildly flipping back and forth between the two. But the other part of it, what I was trying to say is that, again, people might say, well, where does yoga end up? It ends up in samadhi, or it ends up in kaivalya. And, you know, if you footnote what I was saying, I mean, the kaivalya part is where the fourth pada is a technical treatise about utter separation from the world around one. But in the third pada, there is a freedom given to make choices. And I think the examples from the third pada about, again, applying your focus to things before you would seem to me, for a Christian yogi, to be able also then to return to the world in which we live and make choices as Christians in Ignatian spirituality. But I don't see at any level anything, you know, so radically dangerous or so radically, you know, red light flashing to say, you know, only do yoga up to this point and then stop. Because my point is that if you go all the way in to the depths of yoga, you may find yourself in the middle of the spiritual exercises as well. And the problem may be people who just like do part. I'll do a little bit of yoga, a little bit of Ignatian spirituality, and I'll end up in a great mess. But if you keep going, you may find yourself in the free space where they come together.
First of all, thank you so much, Frank. Your presentation and the handout that you gave are much fruit to continue to pray with, to uncover some of the precepts that you have shared with us. I mean, that idea, that center point of, we talked earlier before we began, where the spiritual exercises offers that interior freedom. And I love how you said that the practicing yoga is a great way to sort of be prepared to experience the exercises, or vice versa. But I'm just, the election, you know, I mean, some of the people that are watching are not as familiar with the spiritual exercises or not. And can you talk a bit more about how that the election, that moment of focus takes shape in our life? And I know the contemplatio, I know often I've been a spiritual director for a number of years. There's many different ways that you can proceed. And your idea of that authentic self, if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, as for the election, I mean, I think we, you know, early on in the society, you know, like not so long after the life of Ignatius Loyola, it became a practice that Jesuits would make the spiritual exercises every year. And it's still a rule to do the exercises every year in some way or another. But I think early on, Ignatius seemed to be thinking, this is something you do in order to put your life back in order, to rethink what you're about, and to get on the track of the greater glory of God, as you said before, the Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam. And I think what he had in mind was that people have all kinds of, you know, people have obligations. So they're married or not, they're a cleric or not, they have vast amounts of debt or not, they have physical conditions that limit their mobility or not. What are you going to do with your life for God in terms of what you are? That the exercise is meant to clear out a space in which you can say, what I'm called to do is be a better spouse to my spouse, or what I'm called to be a better parent to my children, or I'm a banker to be, you know, better with my customers, or a politician to be better in government, or I'm a prince or something in that day. Or I have a certain freedom in my life and I can do something else more. And again, this sense of if you are free and if you have no attachments like great debt or family or other obligations, you can suddenly realize that you are like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, or you're like Matthew sitting there counting his money and suddenly get up and leave it, or the apostles, the fishermen getting up and leaving their boats and coming. That he really had this dramatic sense that you could get people to think and stop and say, I don't just have to keep doing what I've been doing until now. And, you know, and for him and for his first companions at University of Paris, where they're able to put aside their studies, put aside their obligation to become professors and so on like that, and go forth with Ignatius and Francis Xavier, his best first companion, to go off to India 2 years after the order was founded. All of this stuff is at the heart of the election. And I think in a way, I think the Yoga Sutras give you a paradigm or a map that kind of intensifies what Ignatius is up to in terms of what do I want to do with my life now? Does that get at what you were asking?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So another question here about, well, freedom. Freedom is a place of real, I think, connection between these two traditions, non-attachment and freedom. And so I like, that you shared in these 3 different degrees of humility here. And this is such the movement in the exercises of moving to a deeper and deeper place of freedom, especially in these days that we're in here right now. I think an opportunity to move to freedom, but also there's some real challenges we're facing that. And so how do we engage these traditions to help us move to a deeper state of freedom? And the question that came in here that I want to particular, so Sissy's question that came in about, curious what Father Frank would say about how once you've reached that place of non-attachment, you actually make the choice to focus your energies, resources on the one thing, on your vocation. Can you speak to that? I'll add this question again at the bottom if you want to refer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. It is, I mean, it's not easy, but it's hard to get into a position where you're free enough to make a choice. But then what are you choosing among? What are the options before you, I suppose? Is that where the question is leading, maybe?
Yeah, I'm unmuting you. If you want to chime in here and add anything else about the question, feel free to.
Sure. I guess, yes. Once you're there, I'm there. I'm like, I have money, I have a house, I have everything I need. And my question is, I know how to be in samadhi, but because of my wiring, I'm like the P on the Myers-Briggs that's like, oh, everything looks good. I want to do this, that, and the other thing. I'm ready to join Bobby and, so how do I find that one thing and discern?
Yeah.
That's the question, yeah.
I mean, I think in a way, in the exercises, when I quoted on the handout, the 3 times for election in the exercises, Ignatius was a bit cheating because he said, well, the first one is you get knocked off your horse like St. Paul. The third one is you do the exercises and you kind of think it through. And the second one is the discernment. It was really the second one that was most important for Ignatius, the lights, the consolations, desolations, light and darkness, and so on like that. And I think what he was hoping, again, people who had some fluidity, do you want to enter a religious life? I mean, do you want to go into public service? Do you want to give away everything and become like Francis of Assisi? No, I'm not ready for that. Or I can't possibly do that because I have obligations to family, I have obligations, the job I have commit me, and so on like that. I think he was imagining within a certain frame that you would have choices, again, standard choices like religious life or lay life, married life or unmarried life, poverty or wealth, and so on. But what struck me in thinking about this is that Patanjali is doing the same thing, that samadhi is in a sense not the end. In the third pada, it's not the end. In the first pada, it is the end. You come to this asabragyata samadhi and you're there. Or kaivalya, you're there. But the whole thing is, dharana, dhyana, samadhi creates samyama. And then I think he's giving examples. Meditate, focus on the sun, the moon, focus on sound, focus on time. And almost as if to say, find these things in the world around you, focus on them intensely, and then if you're not moved to stay there, move on to something else. So, the different possibilities of life, that even in samadhi, according to Patanjali, at least the structure, you can keep looking. Now he does at the end say the preference is for this utter simplicity, being is pure, you are pure, and you have this kind of state of utter kaivalya or simplicity. But it seems that there are choices, and I think you could apply in the 21st century samyama to again, going into public service or being a teacher or giving a larger amount of my wealth to the poor or whatever. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about, if that makes any sense. Did you,
Yeah, let's move to, I think we have time for one or two more here. Carol, did you want to throw another question into the mix?
Well, I'm just thinking that this time that we find ourselves in, you talking about this sense of time and coronavirus, we're all staying home. Many of us are staying home. And I'm just wondering if you have any words of wisdom. You know, that beautiful love and grace is enough for us. But any of your suggestions, your words of wisdom on the journey that we find ourselves in at this particular moment?
Yeah, I should say two things. One first thing is, as with Sissy's question, if anyone wants to follow up, Bobby could put you in touch with me for email exchange or something like that. So things we don't have time for now. You know, on how to be and how to act in time of pandemic, I mean, I want to say on one level, your guess is as good as mine in terms of how to be in this context. But I think one thing I'd point to vividly that I think many of us have experienced in the last week or so is the important, in some ways difficult, but also liberating fact that all the churches were closed and that we couldn't do Palm Sunday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday in church in the traditional ways and all the traditional stuff. So saying, stop, don't do any of that. Now, how will you be with Christ in the Last Supper, Passion, Death, and Resurrection? And sort of saying, you have to reinvent it because you're not going to sit in the seventh pew on the right side, or you're not going to be the priest at the altar. You're going to have to reinvent this. And I know my students here at Harvard Divinity School, many of them have been wildly reinventing Holy Week and so on online and online Zoom services and so on like that. But stopping those things is sort of like, you know, it's an Ignatian, and not maybe that Ignatius would have contemplated it, but Ignatian fasting or yogic fasting. Stop the things that you think are absolutely essential and see what you do. And then broader, of course, you know, no, you can't go to work. No, you can't go to the movies. No, you can't go out to dinner. You have to keep your distance from other people. I think forces us into a situation that on many levels is just entirely regrettable. And some people have suffered incredibly loss, personal loss, family loss, etc., job loss and all that. But within that, for those of us who are, secondarily suffering from the shutdown, the ability to say, if so many things in your life have suddenly been stopped, then where are the Ignatian and yogic resources to reimagine the situation in which you find yourself to disclose its spiritual possibilities? And that might lead some of us to do something. How can I help? But others to say, I've been addicted even to good things, and to get rid of my addictions by letting go of some of the things that I thought were absolutely essential to my life and so on. Ideally, if we have communication with other people, as I'm sure we do, also trying to say, well, how can I, who try to be an Ignatian yogi in practice, how can I kind of bring a sense of equilibrium, a sense of samatva, equanimity in the flux of things that might help other people. But on the immediate level, it's a certain kind of poverty that's being imposed on the entire world at once to let go of things you thought were essential. Easy for us to say in rich countries like this, hard to say if you're living in a very poor slum in a certain country. But nonetheless, we're also being said, stop, let go, and now pay attention to the room you're confined in or something like that. You know, it becomes a moment of spiritual Ignatian and yogic meditation that was imposed on us all at once, that we didn't think, it's not just I'm going to go away for a weekend and do this. Suddenly, like it or not, it's your life for a period of time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, well, Frank, this is amazing. I'm so glad this is happening here. So thank you for being part of this conversation and guiding us deeper. thank you to all of you who are part of this, who are all the participants who have joined in and make this possible. It's really exciting to just be continuing. We talk about Ignatian Yoga as a conversation, that we invite different people in. And what I love, like Frank has a certain gift and a skill that is unique to Frank. And Carol and I and Nikki have our own unique gifts and strengths. So God works with us each individually and has created us uniquely. So I can't be Frank, even though I admire him so much and look up to him and see him as a mentor. I can't do Frank, but I can do Bobby, and do what God is calling me to do. So I think these traditions of Ignatian spirituality and yoga are vast, and it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And so we kind of each have to discern the steps we take to engage in this. We see the books behind Frank. I remember being in his office some years ago, and he explained the yoga are my books, in a way. So his yoga practice, right, is engaging with Sanskrit and Tamil, two completely different scripts that he reads and writes. It's like, that's not my journey. But so some of us, our yoga is more the warrior two or downward dog, right? But yoga is a vast tradition. So he mentioned Jnana Yoga, Jnana, the yoga of knowledge. So this is something that we're practicing, Jnana Yoga, of learning through gaining knowledge. In a moment, we'll transition into Hatha Yoga. So with all that, just really exciting, and hope this is just one more step of the conversation and we can continue this. Frank, any final words in terms of anything final you want to share? But I'm sure people are wondering, like, if they do want to go deeper in the study of it, what would you recommend for maybe either books of yours or other resources to keep going in this line of study?
I would say, probably everybody is doing what they need to be doing already and can continue on the path they're on. I guess I would say is, insofar as you have time, on the yoga side, like, think about the structure of the Yoga Sutras. Read, like, Feuerstein's is a good translation of the Yoga Sutras with notes and all that. Like, look at the whole thing as a kind of an intellectual practice and see how just learning about what all the stuff that's in the Yoga Sutras might be informative if you've not done that yet. Likewise, the spiritual exercise, if you've not made the exercises to do a week retreat, a weekend retreat or something. But I guess, Bobby mentioned I had done years ago now, like, Yoga in Lent, a series of blogs. They're in the book I published, like, was it Being Interreligiously in the World or something? It's a book I did with Fortress Press like 2 years ago that has them all in the book, which I can't think of the title at the moment, but you could read some of those things. Otherwise, I guess, I think what would Ignatius say or Patanjali say, take a deep breath, stop, look at yourself where you are, and then say, what's the next step? And so you kind of follow your internal compass or clock to go a step further. And then the last thing about the books behind me, but the icon I have on the wall, if you can see it, Jesus holding a book. And that's one that's favorite to me. So it's there when I'm reading my books, I look at Jesus holding a book and realize that book learning is not everything, certainly, but nonetheless is a way in which the book can be a gift, the book of the exercises, the book of the sutras, and these things are connected. And as I said, if you had some follow-up questions, if anyone wanted to be in touch by email, Bobby could pass your messages along to me. That would be possible. But thank you all, and God bless, and glad to be with you for this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. To be continued. Really appreciate you being with us and sharing all this. Now we're going to move to practice. So to calm the mind after receiving all this, let's integrate it. So Carol is going to lead us through about a half-hour practice. We'll take a little bit of time just for some small group sharing, as we think this is important to invite everybody into the conversation. So we'll have a short small group and then close things off at the end of the 2 hours. So we'll pass it to Carol.
Hey, thank you so much, Bobby. So I teach yoga to college students who are very much in their heads. So one of the 4 pillars of Ignatian yoga is embodiment. So social justice, community, prayer, embodiment. So why don't we just start by standing up, just stand up, and just, we've been sitting for a bit, so just begin by, just shake your wrists a bit, and just perhaps go up on your tippy toes and on heels, open your feet like they're books, inside, outside. I do a couple of rounds of that. Tippy toes, heels, open your feet, and just feel your feet grounded on the mat, on your mat, on the earth. Just right here, come into this very cornerstone pose in yoga, Tadasana, mountain pose. Just shut your eyes. Feel yourself grounded on the mat. Just thank God at the beginning of this practice, these next few minutes, for the ability to move, whether you're sitting on a chair or standing up, however it is that you come to practice. Just begin, as we begin in all things, thanking God. And just take your hands and lift them up towards the sky. Interlace your thumbs and reach back. Just a couple of stretches. Reach back. And then find yourself coming to the front of your mat. And at the front of the mat, once again, lift your hands up towards the sky. Reach back, nice stretch. Come back to center. Let the hands fold down to the earth. Let your head hang heavy for a moment. Shake your head yes, shake your head no. You can grasp your elbows here and just gently twist left and right, left and right. It's a way to pray with our bodies, this practice. Come back to center and just squat down for a moment. Feel your heels press into the earth. Nice steady breath. And then rise back up. Switch the grip of elbows. Sway slightly left and right, left and right. Come back to center and then just squat down once again. Rise back up. Come up halfway with the flat back. And then let the hands frame the feet, left foot back, right foot back. Let's come into a plank pose for just a moment. Just bounce your toes. We're going to stretch and move for a bit. We're going to put our left hand in the center of the mat. You can stack your ankles. You can always put that left leg in a kickstand. Reach up with that right arm. Look up at the right hand. Reach up. Notice your hands and your heart's wide open to receive love, to give love. Come back to plank. That right hand's in the center. Reach that left hand up. You can always kickstand that right leg. Reach up, look up. Come back to center. Come down to hands and knees. And in this hands and knees, your wrists are directly below shoulders. Just take a moment here to find balance and inhale. We'll do a couple of cat-cows. Lifting the spine, stretching. exhale, lift up your heart and your tail. And do that 3 times at your own rhythm and speed, cat-cow. Nice, deep, steady breath. And on that 3rd round, coming back to a flat back neutral tabletop position, let your left foot go back and just begin by massaging the toes on the mat, making circles with your ankles. And then just lift that left leg up. The foot is flexed. Reach out with the right hand, a nice big stretch. Like you're gonna push that left heel into a wall. Feel that stretch from the core of the body. Then place the hand and the knee back on the mat. Reach back with that right foot. Left fingertips come out, stretch. And then come back to hands and knees. And from here, you're gonna come down on your elbows. Just take the crown of your head, begin to massage the crown of your head. We're holding the weight of the world in lots of ways on our shoulders, and just let go and let God here. Left and right. Maybe bring the sides of the head in. Then come back up, tabletop position. Place your left hand in the center of the mat and reach up and look up at that right hand. Reach up, up, up towards the sky. And then thread your hand through and then go right back up with that right hand. Reach up, look up, right shoulder comes back slightly. Thread your hand through and then reach back up one more time. Reach up, look at that right hand. And then thread your hand through, place your ear on the mat. You could take that left hand, press into the right hand, or place the left hand around the lower back. One more breath here. Let's come back up to tabletop position. And then let's try that on the opposite side. Right hand in the middle, reach up with that left hand, reach up, look up, reach up. And then thread it through. And then once again, reach up, look up at that left hand, left shoulder comes back. And then thread it through. And then one final time, reach up, look up, left shoulder comes back. Thread that hand through. And this time you could take your right hand, press into the left hand, your ear comes down to the mat. Right hand can go to the lower back, yogi's choice. One more breath here. Then let's come back to tabletop. Really open the fingers wide like they're starfish. The palms of your hands have suction cups, imagine. Then curl your toes. Come on up for maybe your first downward dog of the day. Pump the legs up and down. Press into the palms of hands. Look at your belly button. And then from here, put your left foot in the middle, reach up with that right leg, bend your knee, stack your hips and stretch. Looking underneath that right armpit. Then extend that toes back up towards the sky. That foot comes down. Right foot in the middle. Kick that left leg up. Stack the heels. And breathe. Look underneath the left armpit. Come back to center. Now from here in a downward dog, walk the feet to the front of the mat. Come to the front of your mat. Come up halfway. Plant the hands that they frame the feet. That right foot comes back. Come on up for warrior one. Bit of a back bend here. Open up to warrior two. Reach back with that right hand to the back of the right thigh. Reach back with that left hand. Back to warrior two. Straighten that left leg, hinge forward with left fingertips. Come on down to a triangle pose. Reach up with that right hand. One more breath. Come back up to warrior two. And then from here, straighten that left leg. Bring the toes that you're facing the opposite side. Let's come into warrior one. And from this warrior one, come into warrior two. And this warrior two, that left hand comes to the back, the left leg. Reach up and stretch. Come back to warrior two, straighten right leg. Right fingertips come down to that right ankle, reach up with that left arm. One more breath. Come back up to warrior two. And then from here, we're gonna frame that right foot, bring that right foot back, come into a plank pose, flow back into downward dog. Come down to hands and knees. From hands and knees, we're gonna find ourselves coming into a seated position. Bending the knees, let's come on to our backs. Bring the shoulders together. Knees are together. Ankles together. Reach down and touch the back of your ankles. And then lift the hips. Interlace fingers below the sacrum, or place the hands on the side of your mat, or hold the side of the mat. This push-pull as we lift the hips up and pull the glutes down to the earth. Lift the hips. And then let's come down slowly, 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 vertebrae by vertebrae. And then from here, let's hug the knees into the chest, massage lower back, left, right, left, right. Come back to center, plant the feet once again. And then once again, lift up those hips, interlace fingers or keep them to the sides. One more breath here. Come back down, vertebrae by vertebrae, until your back hits the mat. Let's drop our left leg down to the mat, hug that right knee in, all the way up towards our shoulder. Push out through that left heel. Life is push-pull sometimes, so let's bring that right knee up, push out through left heel. Lift that right leg up. Either take yogi fingers and grab that big toe, reach down to the ankle. Take the palm of the left hand and hold that left hip and begin to inhale, exhale, drop that right leg. When the left hip begins to come up off the mat, that's where you stop. One more breath here. Come back to center. You can let that right leg fall over to left side. Reach over with right hand, spinal twist here. Look over right side, both shoulders are on the mat. One more breath. Come back to center. Once again, lift that leg up. Hug it into your chest. Let that right leg come down to the mat. And then pull that left leg up to your chest, up to your ear. Right leg is flat on the ground. Foot is flexed. Push through the right ankle, right heel as you pull that knee up. Right hand on right hip. Inhale, exhale, drop that left knee over to left side. Come back to center. Lift that left leg up towards the sky. Reach up. Grab ankle or toes. Right hand on right hip. Inhale, exhale, drop the left leg over to left side. When the right hip comes up, that's where you stop. One more breath. Come back to center. That left leg goes to the right hand. Bring that left leg over to right side. Open the left arm, look over left side, spinal twist. One more breath. Back to center. Hug that knee in. Hug both knees into the chest. Massage lower back, gently rock left, right, left, right. Begin to bring the knees over to the right side. Look over left side, once again, a spinal twist. Feel your shoulders on the floor. One more breath. Come back to center. Hug knees into the chest. Knees come over to left side. Open the right arm, look over right side. One more breath here. Come back to center. Lift the bottoms of your feet up towards the sky. Arms come out into cactus arms here. Imagine you have a magic marker at the heels of your feet and you're outlining the number 8 on the ceiling. Back and forth, back and forth. And then begin to reach up and grab the bottoms of your feet. Maybe bend one knee and let one leg come over to the side. Let the body move around. Perhaps bring the feet together, Baddha Konasana. And then any final movements, if you want to go into shoulder stand or plow, you can do this. Bring the heels of the feet up towards the ceiling. Just massage lower back. And then begin to get ready to bring the body down to the mat. Letting the entire body just be held and supported by the earth. Relax the hair on your head. Relax and soften your face and that space in between eyebrows where we sometimes hold stress and tension. Just breathe softness there. Just let the worry lines just melt off of your face. Relax your cheeks. Soften your eyes. Just let your eyes soften and relax. Feel the space behind your eyes. For many of us, we've been looking at lots of screens. So just breathe softness here. Behind your eyes. Just go into your heart space here for just a moment. See if you can bring some love up from your heart space to bathe and soften your eyes with love. Relax your jaw. Let your jaw melt. Relax shoulders. Relax belly. Hips. Just breathe and relax. Begin to bring gentle movement into fingers, little tiny, tiny micro movements between fingers and toes. Perhaps extend your fingers wide, open your fingers wide. Begin to make circles with wrists and ankles, and then reach arms back, stretching back, stretch, stretch, stretch. Maybe giving yourself permission to have a nice yawn and a stretch. And then find yourself coming onto either left or right side into a final resting fetal position. And in this resting fetal position, allow yourself to be held by the hand of God in this moment. And in fact, each moment of our lives. Feeling nurtured, loved, peaceful, and still. Begin to reach over and pull yourself up, taking your time, keeping eyes closed, finding yourself coming on up into a cross-legged seating position. Bring awareness back to sweet, calm breath. Breathing in God's desire for us to have peace in our world, peace in our communities, but it begins with peace in our own hearts, minds, and bodies. Take hands and place them in prayer position, thumbs touching sternum, elbows out, palms pushed together. Bowing your head gently, thanking yourself for participating in this retreat, thanking God for the gift of strength in our bodies, for the gift of the risen Christ this Easter tide, for the gift of Alleluia. It's my deep privilege and honor in leading you in the practice. And when you're ready, we'll all join each other once again. And I believe, Bobby, we're going to be going into some small groups now.
Yeah, thank you, Carol, so much. Feels nice. Carol's in the Poconos right now in Pennsylvania in her cabin, so it feels nice just to be with you and with your fire and your very calming presence. Thank you for that beautiful class. The two questions that we're putting out there, first, a more question from the head of what insights or questions are you left with from after hearing Frank Clooney speak? And then the second question of the heart, how is your heart feeling these days? How is your heart feeling right now? So two potential prompts. If a small group is not something that you are into right now, feel free to continue to pray, continue to journal, stay in Shavasana, and then in about 10 minutes, we'll come back for a closing prayer and some updates about next week, our final session together. Coming back into the large group, if you'd like to write in your chat any insights, any themes, a word or phrase you shared or you heard from your small group. Father Frank is one of the most compelling, insightful speakers on the retreat. We talked about different books. Fun to hear others around the world. Love to keep this going somehow. Talked about Richard Rohr. Beautiful artwork to meditate on. Wonderful. Well, we can keep reading through these. I've got a couple closing thoughts before Carol offers the final prayer, but Frank, is there anything further that you'd like to, any final insights to drop in here?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I would just, first of all, thank Carol for such a thorough and elegant presentation. I was sitting at my desk entirely through it, but nonetheless, I picked up some good tips. But I would say it just brings home, I think it's a really important part of Ignatian yoga that you do this, you do the expositions, the teachings, and the practice together. And I think Ignatius Loyola would say the same thing about the exercises. They're exercises, you do them, you perform them, body, soul, mind, heart, as well as kind of separating yourself and entering into your inner space. It's a matter of inside, outside, you and your surroundings. And I think Carol's presentation, demonstration was such an eloquent kind of crossover between the words I was speaking and then the doing, and these things are all connected. And I think part of the nice thing about yoga is that everybody has the vision that what we do and what we see and what we say are connected, and that a spirituality that doesn't have the body as so primarily a part of it is missing something. Soul, yes, but also body. And I think Carol did a wonderful job of showing us how this works.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's the cura personalis, one of the terms from in the Jesuit tradition and Ignatian spirituality we talk about. So the more we do this Ignatian yoga, finding these connections, it just seems to make so much sense to click that, like, if we're talking about a holistic care, the whole person, God becoming, incarnating, taking on flesh, that bringing in of the different aspects of what it means to be human. So thank you to Frank and Carol for helping break open these different dimensions of who we are and helping us make space and realize God's presence within and around us. A word about next week. We talked as a core team, the Ignatian Yoga team this week, and we're gonna gather together as a core team to share. So Alan will be back, who was with us from the first session, Carolyn from last week, and Pat Cassidy as well, and Nikki, and we're gonna share some graces from this retreat, from Ignatian Yoga in general, some graces of this time that we've been living through in the pandemic, and share some visions or some hopes so to go forward. And so we're going to invite you all into that conversation as well. So considering some of the graces, some of the difficulties, some of the grievings. So what are we grieving, to sit with that. So this week I invite you to sit with, if you're able to sit with some of the grief and the challenge, the things we've had to let go of, to mourn the loss of, and also opening to see how God is entering into this space and inviting us into something new, into a new consciousness, a new church, a new economy, a new world to embrace. But that sense of grief and hope, as Walter Brueggemann speaks of. And let's pray and pray for and thank Nikki. She is in the middle of moving from one house to another, along with 2 children, and her husband, and school and work. So send your love and prayers to Nikki. Nikki has been amazing the past almost 2 years that she's been on part of this team. And with that, let's continue to hold each other in prayer. We'll gather again next weekend. And thanks again to Frank. And we'll be in touch. We appreciate any feedback you have. So please be in touch with us. And so I'll pass it to Carol for a closing prayer.
Great. Thank you. Thanks again for all of you for being here. It's so awesome to be with people in El Salvador and Spain and all over. And I just invite you, I've been reading about there's going to be meteors these next few evenings up till the 23rd. And I think it's all around the world, I believe what I read. So Ignatius often invited his companions to go out and ponder the stars. I've been spending a lot of time outside just watching the birds, just birds praising God in the way that they were created. So in this time, I've been praying for the grace of patience. I think Frank a few weeks ago really talked about where contemplative's an action, but the ACTION, that's the part that a lot of us have lived our lives, and to move deeper and deeper into this contemplative way of being, right? So I'm praying for the grace of patience. And so Teilhard de Chardin is the beautiful, beautiful prayer on patient trust. So just get yourself into prayer position, being aware once again of the gift of our breath, the gift of our bodies, patient trust. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything, to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet, it is the law of all progress that is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time That is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Amen. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, pray for us.
Amen. Thank you, Carol. Thank you all.
Okay.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Jim. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.